Somewhere in your home there is a small shelf or a drawer where the remedies live. Every tablet on it can be traced back, if you follow the thread far enough, to something that once grew in soil and turned its face toward the light. The part that stays with you long before there were laboratories, there were gardens, and the willow whose bark eased an ancient fever is the same willow that became the aspirin you reach for now. Welcome to Psychology for Sleep. A walled garden at dusk and shelves of old apothecary jars beyond it. Old apothecary jars, glass dim with age, hold leaves and roots that have quietly tended human bodies for thousands of years, asking nothing in return. You're resting among gentle healers in the apothecary garden at dusk. Let the day's small aches loosen and unwind, as old remedies have always soothed. Let's trace the thread back and count how much of your medicine cabinet first began as a plant. Somewhere in your home tonight there is a small bottle, a tablet, a tin of something you reach for when the day has worn you down. Underneath everything we follow this evening sits one quiet question. How many of the medicines you trust began their long life as a plant rooted in soil somewhere far older than you? You have swallowed a pill without ever wondering where its first ancestor grew. Yet almost every one of them traces back to a leaf, a bark, a root that some long-gone person once chewed, brewed, or pressed against a wound. The story of medicine is not a story of laboratories first. It is a story of forests, of fields, of human hands learning what the green world had been offering all along. You've probably watched a sick dog wander the yard and nibble grass, then walk away looking a little steadier. That instinct you noticed is older than agriculture, older than language, and humans were watching it long before they understood it. Researchers studying animal self-medication, a field called zoopharmacognosy, have found that chimpanzees swallow rough leaves whole to scar parasites from their guts, and that elephants and birds seek out specific plants when ailing. Our distant ancestors lived alongside these animals and learned by watching them. When a creature recovered after eating a certain root, a curious human remembered. The first pharmacy had no shelves. It had eyes, patience, and a willingness to notice what the living world already seemed to know. Think of the last time you tried something new because someone before you swore it worked. That same trust, passed hand to hand across uncountable generations, is how the earliest plant knowledge survived. Long before writing, early humans gathered medicinal understanding through slow trial and error, tasting, watching, remembering which plants soothed and which harmed. Anthropologists believe this knowledge moved through families and tribes as carefully guarded wisdom, refined over thousands of years. Each generation inherited a living library it could neither read nor lose. A grandmother's remedy was not a guess. It was the distilled experience of everyone who came before her, tested against real bodies, real fevers, real pain, and kept because it kept working. You know the feeling of reaching for warmth when something aches, a hot cloth, a familiar tea. Our ancestors reached for plants the same way, guided by a sense that the world held quiet remedies waiting to be found. Archaeological evidence suggests this began astonishingly early. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, a Neanderthal burial site dated to roughly 60,000 years ago contained traces of plant pollens, and dental tartar from Neanderthal remains has revealed compounds from yarrow and chamomile, plants with no nutritional appeal but real medicinal value. Whether or not those particular individuals used them as medicine, the chemistry tells us something tender. The instinct to ease suffering with the green world is not modern. It may be older than our own species. Somewhere in you, there is a memory of being cared for when you were small and sick, of someone reaching for the thing that would help. That gesture has a deep history. The oldest written medical records we possess come from ancient Sumer in Mesopotamia, where scribes pressed remedies into clay tablets more than 4,000 years ago. One tablet, dated to around 2100 BCE, lists prescriptions using myrrh, thyme, willow, and figs, ground and mixed with care. These were not magic spells. They were practical instructions, a doctor's notes preserved in baked clay. When you read that a Sumerian healer prescribed willow for pain, you are hearing a voice across 4 millennia saying the same thing a body still says tonight: this helps. You have likely felt the dull throb of a headache and reached for relief without a second thought. That relief has an ancient name, and it grew on a tree near water. The willow, with its long, drooping branches, was one of humanity's earliest and most reliable pain remedies. Ancient Sumerians and Egyptians both recorded its use, and the practice spread across continents and centuries. People did not know why willow bark eased their suffering. They only knew that chewing it or steeping it in water softened the ache of fevers and sore joints. For thousands of years, this quiet tree by the riverbank was a trusted friend to the suffering, long before anyone could explain the secret folded inside its bark. Imagine a great river valley, the land green and fertile, and people there writing down everything they knew about healing. In ancient Egypt, that record survives as one of the oldest and most complete medical texts in the world. The Ebers Papyrus, dated to around 1550 BCE, stretches more than 60 feet long and contains some 700 remedies, the great majority drawn from plants. It names aloe for the skin, garlic for strength, juniper, fennel, castor oil, and willow for pain. The Egyptians were meticulous, recording dosages and preparations with the seriousness of physicians. When you rub aloe on a burn tonight, you echo a hand that did the same beside the Nile more than 3,000 years ago. You may have soothed an irritated patch of skin with the cool inside of an aloe leaf, that clear gel that seems to draw the heat out. The Egyptians did this too, and they treasured the plant deeply. Aloe vera appears throughout their medical writings and even in their burial customs, valued for healing wounds, calming inflamed skin, and easing the discomfort of sunburn under a relentless sun. Modern research confirms aloe contains compounds that genuinely support skin repair and reduce inflammation. The ancient hand that pressed a split leaf to a wound was not mistaken. It had found, through patient observation, something true. The comfort you feel from that same gel is a thread connecting you, quietly, to a healer who lived beside pyramids. Think of garlic, its sharp smell rising from a kitchen, and how often it is called good for you, almost without explanation. That reputation is ancient, and it was earned through long use. In Egypt, garlic was fed to the laborers who built the great monuments, believed to grant strength and ward off illness. Clay models of garlic bulbs were even placed in tombs. Across the ancient world, from Greece to China, garlic was used to treat infections, fatigue, and a host of ailments. Today, science has identified allicin, a sulfur compound in garlic with real antimicrobial properties. The old belief in garlic's protective power was not superstition. It was a true observation, waiting patiently for chemistry to one day explain it. By now you may feel a pattern forming, a sense that the same plants kept appearing in different lands, among people who never met. That repetition is the quiet heart of our question tonight. If healers separated by oceans and centuries arrived at the same willow, the same aloe, the same garlic, then perhaps the medicines in your cabinet are not modern inventions at all, but inheritances. The question we opened is beginning to turn. It is less about how many of your medicines came from plants, and more about how deeply human it is to find them. Across every early culture, people looked to the living world for relief, and the living world, again and again, answered. Right now, as you rest here, there are plants growing in the dark somewhere, willows leaning toward water, aloe holding moisture in their thick green leaves, doing the slow chemistry they have always done, asking nothing of you. That same patient making, the kind that filled clay tablets and long papyrus scrolls, is happening in the world this very moment, without instruction, without effort. You don't need to understand it for it to be true. What you haven't heard yet is how this quiet inheritance traveled out of the ancient river valleys and into the great systems of healing that still shape medicine cabinets today. That is where the next stretch begins. Let's follow the knowledge as it spreads. You may have heard someone speak of balancing the body, of foods that warm or cool, of healing as a kind of harmony rather than a single cure. That way of thinking has roots in one of the oldest continuous medical traditions on Earth. In ancient China, herbal medicine grew into a vast and careful system over thousands of years. Legend credits the mythical Emperor Shennong with tasting hundreds of herbs to learn their effects, even poisoning himself in the pursuit of knowledge. Whether or not he lived, the story honors something real. A culture that catalogued plants with extraordinary devotion, building a pharmacy of thousands of remedies that still influences how a third of the world approaches healing today. Consider how comforting it is to believe that nearly everything has a use, that no plant is wasted. Traditional Chinese herbalism held something close to that faith. Its great reference, the Shennong Bencao Jing, compiled roughly 2,000 years ago, described hundreds of medicinal substances, sorting them by their effects on the body. Later, in the 16th century, the physician Li Shizhen spent nearly 3 decades compiling the Bencao Gangmu, a monumental work cataloguing some 1,800 substances and over 11,000 prescriptions. This was not folklore casually gathered. It was rigorous, lifelong scholarship. The same impulse that drives a modern researcher to test and record was alive in these healers, who treated the plant world as a text worth reading with their whole lives. You have perhaps felt drawn to the idea that healing the body and calming the mind belong together, that they are not separate tasks. That belief lies at the center of Ayurveda, the ancient healing tradition of India, whose roots stretch back more than 3,000 years. Ayurvedic texts, like the Charaka Samhita, describe hundreds of medicinal plants and their preparations, woven into a philosophy of balance among body, mind, and environment. Turmeric, holy basil, ashwagandha, and countless others were used to ease inflammation, steady the nerves, and restore strength. Many of these plants are now studied in modern laboratories for the very effects ancient healers described. The wisdom was never primitive. It was a different language for the same patient search. Think of turmeric, that deep golden spice that stains everything it touches and colors so many warm dishes. In India, it has been far more than a flavor for thousands of years. Ayurvedic medicine used turmeric to treat wounds, joint pain, and digestive trouble, and it held a sacred place in ritual as well as in the healing of bodies. The bright pigment that gives turmeric its color, curcumin, is now one of the most studied natural compounds in modern science, examined for its anti-inflammatory properties. Ancient healers could not isolate curcumin or measure inflammation. Yet through generations of careful watching, they found a true remedy. The golden root in your kitchen carries the memory of that long, patient discovery. If you have ever steadied yourself with a cup of something calming, you have touched a tradition far older than any tea house. Across the ancient world, healers understood that certain plants could quiet the body and ease the mind. The Greeks, inheriting wisdom from Egypt and the East, gathered this knowledge into a flowering science of their own. Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, recorded hundreds of medicinal plants in the 5th century BCE, and famously advised willow bark and leaves to ease the pains of childbirth and fever. He taught that medicine should rest on observation, not superstition. In doing so, he helped turn the scattered plant wisdom of many cultures into something that could be studied, questioned, and passed forward. You know how a single trusted book can feel like it holds everything you need. For nearly 16 centuries, Western medicine had such a book, and it was built entirely from plants. In the 1st century, a Greek physician named Dioscorides traveled with Roman armies and recorded everything he learned about healing plants in a work called De Materia Medica. It describes some 600 plants and their uses with remarkable care. This single text became the foundation of pharmacology across Europe and the Middle East, copied and recopied by hand for 1500 years. Generations of healers learned their craft from Dioscorides. One man's patient cataloguing of the green world became the bedrock on which so much of medicine would slowly rise. Imagine a quiet monastery, its walls enclosing neat rows of carefully tended herbs. Through the long centuries of the European Middle Ages, much plant medicine was kept alive in exactly such gardens. Monks copied the ancient texts of Dioscorides and others by candlelight, and they grew physic gardens filled with sage, mint, rue, and rosemary, plants for healing as much as for the kitchen. These monastery gardens became living archives, preserving knowledge through centuries when much else was lost. The monks treated the sick who came to their gates, applying remedies handed down across 1,000 years. In their patient tending, a fragile thread of healing wisdom survived, kept green and growing while the wider world changed around it. You have felt, perhaps, the pull towards someone in your community who simply knows things, who carries remedies and quiet confidence. In the medieval world, that person was often the village wise woman or local healer. Far from the monasteries and learned physicians, ordinary people relied on folk healers who knew the plants of the fields and hedgerows intimately. They gathered chamomile for sleep, comfrey for bruises, elderflower for fevers. Knowledge passed mother to daughter across generations. Much of this wisdom was never written down, surviving only in memory and practice. These healers were the true pharmacists of most people's lives, and a great deal of what they knew has since been confirmed by science. Their hands held a real and tested medicine. Think of how knowledge can blossom suddenly when many traditions meet and mingle. During the golden age of Islamic medicine, between the 8th and 13th centuries, scholars gathered the plant wisdom of Greece, Persia, India, and beyond, and carried it further than ever before. The great physician Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, wrote the Canon of Medicine around the year 1025, describing some 800 medicinal substances, most of them plants. His work became a standard medical text in Europe for centuries. Islamic scholars also pioneered the careful preparation of plant extracts and the founding of early pharmacies. They were bridge builders, gathering the scattered green wisdom of many lands and refining it into something more precise. You may sense, resting here, that nothing truly valuable is ever made by one person alone, that real knowledge is a relay across time. The story of plant medicine is exactly that. From Sumerian clay to Egyptian papyrus, from Chinese herbals to Indian texts, from Greek catalogues to Islamic pharmacies to monastery gardens, each tradition gathered, tested, preserved, and handed on. No single culture discovered the healing world. They discovered it together, across thousands of years, each adding to a shared inheritance none of them could see in full. The willow that eased a Sumerian's fever and the willow that comforted a medieval monk were the same tree, reaching across time to the same human need. consider how a remedy your family swears by might one day be confirmed by careful study. The old wisdom and the new finding meeting at last. This meeting is happening right now on a vast scale. Modern scientists have a name for it: ethnobotany, the study of how human cultures use plants, and ethnopharmacology, the search for medicines within that traditional knowledge. Researchers travel to forests and villages, listening to healers, recording which plants are used and why. This ancient wisdom becomes a map, pointing scientists toward plants worth studying. Rather than searching blindly, they follow the trail laid down by thousands of years of human experience. The folk remedy and the laboratory, so often imagined as opposites, turn out to be partners. You have perhaps felt the quiet satisfaction of learning that something you long believed was true after all. Science offers that feeling on a grand scale when it studies ancient remedies. Time and again, plants used for centuries in traditional medicine have revealed real, measurable activity in the laboratory. The willow's pain relief, the garlic's defense against microbes, the turmeric's calming of inflammation, all confirmed. Of course, not every old remedy proves out, and discernment matters, but the proportion that does is striking. The healers of the past were running an enormous, unrecorded experiment across thousands of years, and their conclusions, tested against real suffering, were often right. Their wisdom was a rough draft of the science we trust today. Imagine standing in a vast forest, knowing that hidden among its countless leaves are cures not yet discovered. This is no fantasy. Scientists estimate that only a small fraction of the world's plant species have been thoroughly studied for medicinal compounds. Of the roughly 400,000 known plant species, the great majority remain chemically unexplored. Each one is a small laboratory, quietly producing compounds to defend itself, to attract, to survive, compounds that may one day ease human suffering in ways we cannot yet imagine. The ancient healers worked with only the plants around them. We now glimpse a far larger pharmacy, most of its shelves still unopened, waiting in rainforests and meadows and along quiet riverbanks for someone patient enough to look. You know that feeling of urgency mixed with tenderness when something precious is at risk of being lost. That feeling belongs to the world of plant medicine now. As forests fall and traditional cultures fade, we risk losing both undiscovered plants and the ancient knowledge of how to use them. Each elder who passes without sharing their remedies, each species that vanishes, is a page torn from a book we have barely begun to read. Ethnobotanists work against this quiet loss, recording the wisdom of healers while they still can. It is a tender race, gathering the inheritance of millennia before it slips away. The green pharmacy that has healed us for so long now asks gently to be protected in return. Rest here a moment with everything this hour has gathered so far, from the sick animal nibbling grass, to the Sumerian pressing willow into clay, to the Egyptian unrolling a papyrus of remedies, to the Chinese and Indian healers building their vast herbal libraries. One truth keeps surfacing. The human story and the plant story have always been entwined. The question we began with, how many of your medicines began as plants, is opening into something larger. It is not only about counting pills. It is about recognizing that nearly every act of healing in human history began with someone kneeling beside a plant, hoping and finding that the green world had been holding the answer all along. That is where the next part of the journey begins. You have probably reached for a tablet on a day when your head ached, without ever wondering where the idea of that relief first came from. The willow's comfort, already old by the time of the Sumerians, did not stay for wisdom forever. At some point, a few careful minds stopped simply trusting the bark and began to weigh it, to count who recovered and who did not, to ask how much and how often. That shift from habit to measurement is where this part of the story turns. The bitter brew of riverbank trees was about to be watched with new and patient eyes, season after season, by people determined to understand it. Perhaps you have trusted a remedy simply because it had always worked, even when no one could tell you the reason. The willow tree lived inside that kind of trust for thousands of years. Around 400 BCE, the Greek physician Hippocrates is said to have recommended a tea brewed from willow bark and leaves to ease the pains of childbirth and to bring down fevers. For centuries afterward, the bitter brew remained folk wisdom, useful, reliable, and entirely mysterious. People drank it the way you might follow an old comfort, on faith rather than proof. The reason hid in the bark itself, waiting patiently for a curious mind to come looking. You know how a curiosity can sit untouched for years until someone finally decides to follow it. In 18th century England, a country clergyman named Edward Stone did exactly that. In 1763, he reported to the Royal Society that powdered willow bark, given to dozens of people suffering from fevers and the shaking chills they once called ague, brought them steady relief. He had tasted the bark, noticed its bitterness echoed another known remedy, and quietly tested his hunch on the sick around him. He kept careful notes. He counted his results. For the first time, the old willow remedy was being watched, not with faith, but with measurement. The slow, deliberate gaze of someone asking why. There is a particular satisfaction in finally naming the thing you only used to feel. For the willow, that naming arrived in the early 1800s. Chemists across Europe began trying to find the single substance inside the bark that carried its power. They were no longer content with the whole plant. They wanted the active part, the one molecule doing the work. In 1828, a German pharmacist named Johann Buchner managed to extract a bitter yellow crystal from willow bark. He gave it a name drawn from the Latin word for willow, salix. He called it salicin. The remedy that had hidden in folklore for millennia now had a face and a name you could write down. You may have noticed how the first version of anything is rarely the polished one. Salicin, in its raw form, was bitter and harsh, and it took several careful hands to refine. A year after Buchner, the French pharmacist Henri Leroux improved the extraction and pulled cleaner salicin crystals from the bark in greater amounts. Then, in 1838, the Italian chemist Raffaele Piria took salicin and, through chemistry, transformed it into a stronger and simpler compound he named salicylic acid. Each step traded a little of the plant's complexity for a little more clarity. The willow's gift was being distilled, generation by generation, from a tangled brew into a single, precise substance you could hold and study. Perhaps you have learned that the thing meant to help can sometimes hurt in unexpected ways. Salicylic acid worked. By the middle of the 1800s, it was bringing down fevers and easing the swollen joints of rheumatism better than the old bark teas ever had. But it came with a sting. The acid was rough on the stomach, leaving many who took it with burning pain and nausea, and its taste was bitter enough to make people refuse it. The medicine had become powerful, yet it remained difficult to swallow, useful for the suffering, but costly to the body in its own quiet way. The willow had given a remedy that still asked something painful in return. You know that feeling of being close to an answer, with just one stubborn flaw standing in the way. For the chemists of the late 1800s, salicylic acid was that near answer, effective, affordable, and yet too harsh for many who needed it most. The problem was not whether it worked. The problem was how the body received it. Doctors prescribed it widely for arthritis and fever, but they watched their patients wince at the stomach pain it caused. The puzzle was no longer about finding a cure inside the willow. The cure was already found. What remained was gentler chemistry, the search for a way to keep the healing while removing the harm it carried. You may know how often a great change begins from something personal, close to home. The story of aspirin is often told this way. At the Bayer Company in Germany, near the turn of the 20th century, a young chemist named Felix Hoffmann was working with salicylic acid. By some accounts, his own father suffered from rheumatism and could barely tolerate the harsh medicine that eased his joints. Whether driven by that closeness or by the steady work of the laboratory around him, Hoffmann turned to an older idea, that a small chemical change might soften the acid's bite while keeping its power. The willow's long journey was about to take its final, decisive turn. There is a kind of elegance in solving a problem by adding just one small thing. In 1897, Felix Hoffmann succeeded in attaching a so-called acetyl group to salicylic acid, producing a compound called acetyl salicylic acid. It was a modest chemical adjustment, a single addition to the molecule, but it changed everything about how the body met the medicine. The new compound was far gentler on the stomach, easier to take, and it passed through the body before releasing its familiar relief. The harshness that had troubled salicylic acid for decades was quietly tamed. From the rough acid of the willow, the smoother, kinder version had finally emerged, made not by nature alone, but by a careful human hand. You've probably said the name of this medicine more times than you could count. In 1899, the Bayer Company gave acetyl salicylic acid a short, memorable name and began selling it to the world. They called it aspirin. The name itself carried the plant's history within it, the A from acetyl and spir from spirea, the meadowsweet flower that also produces salicylic acid in nature. First sold as a powder, then later pressed into the familiar tablet, aspirin spread quickly across continents. The bitter willow brew of Hippocrates had become a small white pill you could keep in a drawer, the same ancient comfort, refined into something you could simply swallow and forget. You know how a single discovery can keep unfolding long after it first arrives. Aspirin began as a remedy for fever and pain, but its story did not stop there. For more than 70 years, no one fully understood how it worked inside the body. Then, in 1971, the British pharmacologist John Vane found the answer. Aspirin blocks an enzyme the body uses to make prostaglandins, the molecules that signal pain, fever, and swelling. For that discovery, he later received a share of a Nobel Prize. The willow's gift, used faithfully for thousands of years, had finally surrendered its deepest secret. The plant had been right all along. Science had simply caught up to it. Perhaps you have heard that the same pill in your cabinet can do more than ease a headache. The understanding of how aspirin works opened doors no one had imagined when willow bark was first brewed. Because aspirin quietly affects the way blood platelets clump together, doctors learned that small daily doses could help protect certain people from heart attacks and strokes. A remedy born from a fever tree became, in time, a guardian of the heart. The journey that began with chewing bark for pain had reached into the deepest rhythms of the body. One humble plant, followed patiently across centuries, kept revealing new ways to care for you. You may find comfort in knowing that the old wisdom and the new science were never truly at odds. The willow did not lie to the ancient healers. The bark really did carry relief, just as they believed. What changed across the centuries was not the truth of the plant, but our ability to see inside it, to find the salicin, to shape the acid, to soften it into aspirin, and at last to understand the why. Folk remedy and laboratory chemistry turned out to be two ends of the same long thread. The faith of the bark chewers and the precision of the chemists were, in the end, telling the same quiet story. There is something steadying in watching a single idea travel so far without ever breaking. From a willow tree on a riverbank, to a Greek physician's tea, to a clergyman's careful notes, to a yellow crystal named salicin, to an acid, to a small acetyl group added in a German laboratory. Each hand passed the gift to the next. No single person invented aspirin. It was built slowly by many across more than 2,000 years. The pill resting in your drawer tonight is the sum of all those patient steps, a quiet collaboration between strangers who never met, each one trusting that the willow still had more to give. So consider, as the night softens around you, how many of the medicines you reach for began exactly like this, not in a factory, but in a leaf, a root, or a strip of bark. The willow's journey is only one thread in a vast and gentle web. Quinine came from the cinchona tree's bark, easing fevers across the world. Morphine was drawn from the poppy. Digitalis, which steadies a struggling heart, came from the purple foxglove flower. Each began as folk knowledge and became precise medicine through the same patient unfolding you have just followed. The cabinet in your home is, in truth, a quiet garden, every remedy a plant, remembered and refined. Something in you has grown quieter through all of this. Take one slow breath and feel how the willow's long story has settled into you, like dusk settling over a field. Your body is a little heavier now, a little more at ease, the way it knows to become when nothing is being asked of it. We are wandering through these living remedies together, in no hurry at all. And we will keep going, gently, from here. You may have known a fever that came in waves, a chill, then a burning, then a strange calm before it returned. For centuries that rhythm meant malaria, and the cure came from the bark of a tree in the high Andes. Indigenous Quechua peoples of Peru had long used powdered cinchona bark to quiet shaking chills, and by the 17th century, Jesuit travelers carried it back across the ocean as Jesuits' powder. Inside that bark was quinine, a molecule the tree never made for us, yet one that steadied millions of fevered bodies. What healed you arrived not from a factory, but from a mountainside. There is something humbling in realizing how long a remedy can work before anyone understands why. For nearly 200 years, people took cinchona bark on faith, watching fevers break without knowing the reason. Then, in 1820, two French chemists, Pierre-Joseph Pelletier and Joseph Caventou, isolated pure quinine from the bark for the first time. Quinine interferes with the malaria parasite's ability to digest hemoglobin inside red blood cells, leaving it unable to survive. The tree had been carrying a precise defense all along. The science only caught up to what the bark had quietly been doing for generations of trembling, grateful hands. You have felt how a single source can be stretched until it nearly runs out, how scarcity changes everything. By the 19th century, demand for cinchona bark outpaced the slow-growing trees of South America. Seeds were carried, sometimes secretly, to plantations in Java and India, where vast groves were raised to keep the world supplied with quinine. For a long stretch of history, this one tree shaped where people could safely live and travel. A modest evergreen with pink-white blossoms quietly redrew the map of human movement, all because of the gentle bitterness folded into its bark. You know the particular mercy of pain finally easing, the moment the body unclenches and lets you rest. That mercy, for much of human history, came from a flower. The opium poppy, Papaver somniferum, whose very name means sleep-bringing, has soothed pain for at least 5,000 years, named in Sumerian tablets as the joy plant. When its unripe seed pod is scored, it weeps a pale latex that dries into opium. Within that latex waits morphine, the most reliable comfort against deep pain that humankind had ever found. A pale flower in a quiet field has been answering the body's oldest plea, "Let this hurt grow quiet." There is a kind of relief so complete it feels like being carried. Science can now show you exactly why the poppy offers it. In 1804, a young German apothecary's assistant named Friedrich Serturner isolated morphine from opium, the first time anyone had drawn a pure active compound from any plant. He named it after Morpheus, the god of dreams. Morphine works because its shape fits the body's own opioid receptors, the same locks your natural endorphins use. The flower had, by chance, grown a key to a door already inside you. What soothed you was a quiet conversation between a plant and your own nervous system. You may have noticed how the things that comfort us most are also the ones we must hold with the greatest care. The poppy taught humanity this lesson early. The same morphine that eased the dying and the wounded could also bind the body to itself, and history carries the weight of that double edge. Yet the flower itself holds no intention, only a molecule that happens to fit us perfectly. From morphine, chemists later shaped codeine and other gentle relatives, each one a variation on the poppy's original gift. The plant offered relief. What we made of it was always our own choosing. What just surfaced, that the things which comfort us deepest are the same ones we must hold most carefully, is not only a question about old medicines. You may be carrying a little of that tension in your own body tonight, the quiet weight of caring for something tender. Notice where that watchfulness lives in you right now, somewhere in the chest or the jaw, and let the muscles there grow loose. You don't have to keep guarding anything in this hour. The poppy is in its field, the bark is on its tree, and nothing is asking you to stay alert. Let your breath lengthen, and let the next remedies come to you as softly as the others have. You have placed a hand over your own heart in a quiet moment and felt its steady, faithful work. For people whose hearts began to fail and flutter, healing once came from a tall wild flower with drooping purple bells, the foxglove, Digitalis purpurea. In 1785, an English physician named William Withering published a careful study after learning of a folk remedy used by an herb woman in Shropshire to treat dropsy, the swelling that came from a failing heart. The foxglove, beautiful and quietly poisonous, held within its leaves a way to make a tired heart beat with new strength. There is a tenderness in how the most delicate dose can hold a life steady. Foxglove gave the world digoxin, a compound that gently strengthens each heartbeat and slows a racing pulse, letting each beat fall a little fuller and a little calmer. It does this by easing the balance of sodium and calcium inside the heart's muscle cells, but what the body feels is simply a steadier rhythm. Withering understood even then that the line between remedy and harm was narrow, that the leaf had to be measured with great care. From a flower children once admired in country hedgerows came one of the longest-serving heart medicines in human history, faithful across more than 2 centuries. You may have felt the strange comfort of knowing that someone, long ago, paid close attention so that you could rest easier now. The story of Foxglove is the story of careful watching, of a physician who listened to a country healer and recorded, season after season, exactly which leaf, which dose, which moment helped a swollen body grow light again. Digitalis from the foxglove is still used today, refined and measured to steady certain failing hearts. The wildflower nodding by a stone wall carries within its bells a quiet promise that the body's most faithful muscle could be helped to keep its rhythm a little longer. Quinine from a mountain bark morphine from a sleeping flower, digoxin from a purple bell by the path, and the question we began with comes gently into focus. So much of what tends the human body did not begin in glass and steel. It began in roots and leaves and the patient noticing of people who came before us. The willow, the poppy, the cinchona, the foxglove, each one a quiet caretaker we never had to ask. Tonight, as the count grows, the answer keeps softening into something kinder. The medicines in your cabinet are, nearly all of them, the long memory of plants that learned to heal before we did. You may have run your finger along a leaf and wondered why something so still could be so chemically busy. A plant cannot run from what wants to eat it, and science traces nearly all of plant medicine back to that single fact. Rooted in place, plants evolved a second kind of chemistry, not the sugars and proteins of survival, but compounds whose only job is to influence other living things, which scientists call secondary metabolites. These are the molecules that defend, repel, attract, and heal. The medicines you reach for were never designed for you. They were built for a slower war you were never meant to see. You have tasted bitterness and felt your body recoil before you decided anything. That recoil is ancient, and so are the molecules behind it. Many plant medicines belong to a family called alkaloids. They taste bitter, and they act powerfully on animal nervous systems. Caffeine is an alkaloid. So is nicotine, and quinine, and a long roll of names that shaped human history. Plants make them to discourage the insects and grazers that would eat them, tuned so precisely that what kills a beetle merely changes a human mood. The bitterness on your tongue is a warning, written in chemistry, one your ancestors slowly learned to read. You have probably wondered why a plant would bother making something so costly to build. These compounds are expensive. They take energy a plant could have spent growing taller. Plants invest in them anyway because the threat never stops. Insects, fungi, and browsing animals press in from every direction, and a plant that cannot flee instead becomes bitter, toxic, or simply too complicated to digest. Over millions of years, this slow pressure shaped a remarkable chemical library. What looks like a meadow standing quietly in the dusk is, beneath the surface, a vast and patient pharmacy that grew itself. You have noticed how some plants seem untouched, while others are chewed to lace. That difference is rarely luck. Researchers find that the most chemically defended plants are often the ones least bothered by anything that crawls or grazes. A compound that interferes with an insect's nerves or blocks its ability to digest gives that plant an edge its neighbors lack. And the very property that protects the plant, reaching into a nervous system and changing how it works, is the same one that lets a trace of it quiet a pain in us. Defense and medicine, it turns out, are two readings of one molecule. You may have held a dried herb and wondered how anyone ever found the medicine hidden inside it. The work of finding it has a name: pharmacognosy, the study of medicines drawn from natural sources. For most of history, this meant tasting, watching, and remembering, generations noticing which leaf calmed and which one harmed. Modern pharmacognosy adds instruments that can sort a single plant into hundreds of distinct compounds. Chemists grind the tissue and let solvents draw the molecules apart, one band at a time. What healers once knew by intuition, science now maps in finer and finer grain. The same knowledge, simply read more closely. You have watched tea steep and seen the water slowly take on color. That coloring is extraction, the first and oldest step in turning a plant into a medicine. Chemists do something similar but far more selective. They choose solvents, water, alcohol, gentler modern fluids that dissolve only the molecules they want. Once the active compounds are loosened from the plant tissue, they can be separated, weighed, and studied alone. A leaf is only the container. The medicine is a particular shape of molecules sleeping inside it. Every cup of tea you have ever made was a small, unhurried version of the same quiet chemistry. You may have assumed that once a useful plant is found, the rest is simple. It almost never is. A single plant can hold hundreds of compounds, and the one that heals may exist in vanishingly small amounts. It hides among dozens that do nothing or that cause harm. Scientists isolate one molecule at a time, then test each alone to learn what it truly does. This patient sorting is how a tangled green mass becomes a clear, named, measurable medicine. The plant offers everything at once, with no labels. The slow gift of science is to find the one thread that matters among all the rest. You have heard that the right amount of something heals and too much harms, and plants taught us that lesson first. Their defensive compounds are dose-dependent by design, strong enough to stop an insect, calibrated to merely deter a larger animal. When humans borrow these molecules, the same principle governs everything. A precise amount soothes, a careless amount poisons. This is why so much of medicine is the science of dose. The plant never meant to heal anyone, it meant to defend itself at a particular strength. We simply learn to find the doorway where its defense becomes our relief, and to stand carefully within it. You may know the soft pink flower of the Madagascar periwinkle without knowing what it carries. For generations, it was a roadside plant, pretty and unremarkable. Then, chemists studying it found two alkaloids, vincristine and vinblastine, hidden in its leaves in tiny amounts. These molecules do something precise. They interrupt the internal scaffolding that dividing cells rely on to split apart. In a cancer, where cells divide without restraint, that interruption becomes a way to slow the disease. A flower that asked nothing of the world turned out to hold one of the first real keys to treating cancers that once left families with so little hope. You have probably never thought of a flower as helping to rewrite the future of children, yet one quietly did. Vincristine, drawn from that same periwinkle, became part of the treatment that transformed childhood leukemia. Today, with combination therapies that include vincristine, the great majority of children with acute lymphoblastic leukemia survive, a disease that, within living memory, once offered them almost no hope at all. The molecule does its work by halting cell division at a specific stage, giving the body's defenses time to gain ground. A plant most people would walk past without a glance helped change the lives of children it would never meet. You may have stood beneath an evergreen and never imagined it holding a cancer drug in its bark. The Pacific yew, a slow, shaded tree of the old forests, holds exactly that. From its bark, scientists isolated paclitaxel, the medicine many know as Taxol. It works in a way almost opposite to the periwinkle's molecules. Instead of dissolving a cell's dividing scaffold, it freezes that scaffold solid, so the cancer cell can no longer pull itself apart. Trapped mid-division, the cell cannot multiply. A tree that grows so slowly it was once dismissed as worthless came to carry one of the most widely used cancer medicines in the world. You have perhaps heard that a useful discovery can run into a wall of scarcity, and Taxol's story is exactly that. The early drug came only from the bark of mature Pacific yews, and stripping the bark killed the tree. A single course of treatment could require several centuries of slow forest growth. Science answered the problem not by cutting more trees, but by understanding the molecule. Chemists found ways to build paclitaxel partly from compounds in the yews needles, which regrow and later to assemble it in the laboratory. The forest pointed the way. Human chemistry learned to follow it without emptying the woods. You have likely felt the dull ache of a fever and longed for it to break. For much of human history, one fever above all others shaped where people could live and die: malaria. Its treatment, in the modern age, came from a low Chinese herb called sweet wormwood. Searching ancient medical texts, scientists rediscovered the plant and isolated its active compound, artemisinin. It attacks the malaria parasite during the stage when it hides inside red blood cells, releasing reactive molecules that the parasite cannot survive. A weedy herb gathered for centuries by people who never knew its mechanism became the backbone of malaria treatment for the entire world. You may not realize how often a modern breakthrough begins in an old, half-forgotten remedy. Artemisinin came to light because a researcher took traditional records seriously, then tested them with rigorous chemistry. The plant had been used against fevers for some 2,000 years. What science added was isolation, dose, and proof. This pattern repeats across pharmacognosy. Folk knowledge points to a plant, and laboratory work confirms, refines, and sometimes transforms it into a reliable medicine. The two ways of knowing are not rivals. One noticed that something worked. The other patiently explained why and made it safe enough to trust. Somewhere in the dark right now, in fields and forests you will never see, plants are building these molecules without urgency and without instruction. The periwinkle folding its alkaloids leaf by leaf, the yew laying down its bark one slow ring at a time. None of it waits on being noticed. None of it needs to be understood to keep happening. The same is true of you tonight. The chemistry that mends and steadies in your own body is running on its own, asking nothing of your attention. What we have been circling, how living things quietly make what heals, is nearly in full view now. Let the last of it come to you. There is nothing left to reach for. You have opened a medicine cabinet at the end of a long day, and not once thought of a meadow. Yet the question underneath this whole hour has been quietly waiting there. How many of the medicines in your cabinet began as a plant? The answer keeps widening the closer we look. A pain reliever, a heart medicine, a cancer drug, a cure for the fever that emptied whole regions. Each traces back to a living thing that grew in soil and made a molecule for reasons that had nothing to do with us. Open that cabinet, and you are reaching back into a field at dusk. You may picture a laboratory as the true birthplace of medicine, all glass and clean light. Much of the discovery, though, still begins outdoors. Researchers gather plants from rainforests, deserts, and coastlines, screening their compounds against diseases that resist every drug we have. And most of that green library is still unread, countless species no one has ever examined for their chemistry. Each one is an unread page, a possible molecule we do not yet have a name for. The work of pharmacognosy is far from finished. It is closer to a vast library where most of the books remain unopened, waiting in unexplored ground. You have perhaps wondered why we still bother with plants when chemists can build molecules from scratch. The reason is that plants invent shapes we would never think to try. Evolution spent hundreds of millions of years testing chemical structures against real living problems, keeping only what worked. The result is a catalogue of molecular forms more varied and more cunning than human imagination tends to produce alone. Scientists often start from a plant compound, then modify it in the lab to make it safer or stronger. The plant supplies the original idea. Strange, intricate, field-tested, and human chemistry refines what evolution had already drafted in green. You may not know that the line between a plant's defense and your relief can be astonishingly fine. The foxglove makes this terribly clear. The very compound that strengthens a failing heart will, with only a little too much, push that same heart into danger. A dose just slightly off can stop it. This is why so much careful science surrounds plant-derived drugs, measuring, adjusting, testing, to find the narrow band where harm becomes help. The plant drew no such line. It made one molecule for one purpose. We learn to walk the edge of its chemistry to the place where it turns quietly toward healing. You've likely heard the word natural used as though it always meant gentle. Plants themselves would disagree. Some of the most potent poisons known come from quiet green things. The same chemical inventiveness that gives us cancer drugs also gives us compounds that stop a heart in moments. This is not a flaw in the plants. It is the whole point of their chemistry. Defense does not aim to be kind. What pharmacognosy offers is not a promise that nature is safe, but the patient knowledge of which molecule does what and at what dose. Understanding, not trust, turns a plant's power into a medicine we can hold. You may have assumed that finding the compound is the end of the road, when it is often only the beginning. Once a healing molecule is isolated, science asks how to make it reliably, affordably, and in pure form. Sometimes the plant remains the source. Sometimes chemists learn to build the molecule themselves, or to coax it from cells grown in tanks. The goal is always the same: to free the medicine from the uncertainties of weather, season, and scarcity. The plant gave the first answer. Industry and chemistry work to make that answer dependable enough to reach the people, far from any forest, who will quietly need it. You have perhaps not considered how much of medicine still rests on this one ancient source. Roughly a quarter of modern prescription drugs trace their origins, directly or by inspiration, to plant compounds. Among the medicines that fight cancer, the share is even higher. These are not relics of an older age. They are working tools in hospitals tonight, dripping into veins and dissolving on tongues. Behind each is a plant that made a molecule for its own slow reasons, long before anyone looked. The pharmacy and the wilderness, which feel like such different places, are joined by threads of chemistry too fine to see, but too strong to break. You may sense by now a quiet pattern beneath all these stories. A plant, pressed by enemies it cannot escape, builds a molecule to defend itself. A human, pressed by illness, discovers that same molecule and learns to borrow it. Neither knew of the other when the chemistry was made. The periwinkle did not foresee a leukemia ward. The yew did not anticipate a clinic. And yet the molecules fit, again and again, into the locks of human disease. It is as if two separate stories, one of survival in soil, one of survival in flesh, were written in the same chemical language all along. You have probably felt, somewhere in this hour, a softening of the old line between what is wild and what is medicine. That softening is accurate. The forest is not a place apart from the pharmacy. It is the place the pharmacy keeps returning to. Every screened plant, every isolated alkaloid, every drug refined from a leaf, is a conversation between human need and chemistry that grew without us. We did not invent these cures. We listened for them in bark and flower and weed and learned the language they already spoke. Wild and medicine were always one thing we had not finished understanding. You may notice how little of this required us at all. The molecules formed for their own reasons, in their own time, under pressures that had nothing to do with human pain. We arrived late, as we always do, and found the medicine already made. What we contributed was attention, the patience to notice, isolate, measure, and trust. Science did not create the healing hidden in plants. It walked toward it, step by careful step, until the molecule and the suffering it could ease finally stood in the same room. The cure was waiting in the green long before there was anyone to be cured. Here is what the night has been quietly assembling, piece by piece. The medicines that steady us were grown, not invented. Pharmacognosy is the long practice of finding what plants already made and learning to read its meaning. A plant cannot flee, so it builds chemistry to survive. And within that chemistry, by no design of its own, lie molecules shaped to fit the locks of our diseases. The periwinkle, the yew, the wormwood, all answered their own threats, and in answering, left answers for ours. The medicine cabinet is the oldest collaboration on Earth between things that grew and people who finally learned to listen. Somewhere tonight, a forest you will never walk through is holding a chemistry no laboratory has yet named. Most of the green world remains unread, its leaves a language we are still learning to translate, its compounds still unscreened. Each leaf is a sentence in that unfinished book. The plants are not waiting to be useful, they simply are quietly making what they need to live. And in their making, they have made what we needed too. You have probably stood near a tree without thinking of it as a pharmacy. Yet a single tropical canopy can hold thousands of distinct compounds, each one shaped over millions of years to solve some problem of survival. Researchers call this chemical diversity the deep library of life, and the rainforest holds more of it than anywhere else on Earth. We have catalogued only a sliver. The rest sits in the leaves above our heads, patient, complete, asking nothing. A medicine cabinet we have barely opened. Think of how often the answer turned out to be something already growing. The periwinkle makes its vinca alkaloids to guard its own tissue, yet in the smallest measured amounts, those same molecules slow a child's leukemia. The plant did not invent its chemistry for us, it built defenses against insects, drought, and disease. We simply learned to borrow them at the exact strength where they heal instead of harm. The pharmacy was never built. It grew, slowly, across the long green patience of the world. You may not know the names of the people who first learned which leaf to chew. But across thousands of cultures, healers spent lifetimes watching, tasting, and remembering which plants eased which suffering. Ethnobotanists who study this knowledge find that it is remarkably precise, not folklore, but careful observation passed down across generations. Much of modern medicine began as someone, somewhere, paying close attention. The knowledge came first, the molecule came later. We are still catching up to what was already known. There is a tenderness in how this knowledge survives. It lives in stories, in songs, in the hands of an elder showing a child which root to dig. When a language fades, a whole pharmacy can vanish with it, cures that were never written down, lost in a single generation. Researchers now race to record this wisdom before it disappears. What is at stake is not only words, but centuries of healing held in living memory, fragile as breath, precious beyond measure. You can feel somewhere that the people who knew plants best lived close to them. Indigenous communities have often held the richest plant knowledge precisely because they shared their lives with the forest. They learned its rhythms, when a bark held its medicine, when a flower lost it. Modern science increasingly turns to this knowledge as a starting point, a map drawn by those who walked the land first. The forest taught its oldest neighbors, and through them, it has been teaching the rest of us. Imagine how much remains in plants we have only glanced at. Of the roughly 400,000 known plant species, fewer than a tenth have been examined for medicinal compounds in any serious way. Each unexamined plant is a possibility, a molecule that might ease pain, slow a disease, or do something we have not yet imagined needing. The living world is not finished offering. It is simply waiting on our attention, holding its gifts the way it always has, without urgency. You have likely heard that rainforests are disappearing, but consider what disappears with them. When a forest is cleared, it is not only trees that fall. Every undiscovered compound in those plants vanishes too. Chemistries that took millions of years to form, gone before anyone learned their names. Scientists describe each lost species as a closed book we will never read. Somewhere in those pages, perhaps, were the cures we were still hoping to find. The loss is quiet, and it is permanent. There is something humbling in how little of nature we have truly studied. The ocean, too, holds a pharmacy we are only beginning to explore. Corals, sponges, and microbes producing compounds unlike anything on land. A handful of these have already become medicines. Researchers believe the sea may hold thousands more. From the forest floor to the deep water, the living world keeps offering, in places we rarely think to look, the chemistry that has tended us all along. You may sense that the plants were never trying to heal us. They were only living their own lives, and yet their living became our medicine. This is the gentle accident at the center of everything. A flower defends itself, and a child's fever breaks. A bark resists rot, and a heart finds its rhythm again. The world did not set out to care for us, but in the simple act of staying alive, it has cared for us over and over without ever being asked. Think of how many remedies still grow only in the wild. Despite all our laboratories, a great share of medicinal compounds are still too complex to make from scratch. We gather them or grow the plants that hold them. The living plant remains the chemist we cannot quite replace. Its patience, its slow assembly of molecules across a season, is something our machines still struggle to match. The forest is not only a memory of medicine, it is still, today, the place where medicine is made. You have felt, perhaps, the difference between knowing a thing and living beside it. The healers who understood plants did not read about them, they grew old among them. That intimacy is its own kind of science, slower than ours, but no less true. Researchers who work alongside traditional communities describe a knowledge so detailed it can name the moment a plant's medicine peaks. We are learning, late, that wisdom and attention are not so different, and that both have always lived among the leaves. There is a quiet grief in the plants we lost before we knew them. Botanists speak of species that went extinct in regions cleared so quickly that no one ever described them. Whatever they held, whatever they might have offered, is simply gone. And yet, there is comfort too in how much remains. Vast stretches of forest still stand, still green, still full of chemistry no one has touched. The living pharmacy is wounded, but it is far from empty. It is still here, still offering. You may carry the sense that nature has always been on our side. The evidence is in your own body, in how a plant's molecule fits a receptor. It never met. A key shaped for a lock it could not have known existed. Scientists call these coincidences, but they happen so often they begin to feel like kinship. We and the plants grew from the same long story, made of the same chemistry. We were never strangers to the green world, we were always its kin. So how many of the medicines in your cabinet began as a plant? By now, the honest answer has become clear, more than you ever guessed, and in ways more tangled and tender than a label could hold. The pill, the syrup, the drop, so many of them trace back to a leaf, a root, a flower that was simply living. The cabinet in your home is, quietly, a small museum of the living world's generosity. You have been carrying the forest with you all along. You have probably reached for a remedy without once thinking of where it began, and that forgetting is gentle, almost sweet, proof of how completely the gift was given. When the ache fades, we do not thank the willow whose bark first carried that relief across 4,000 years. We simply rest. The willow folded its chemistry into our lives so seamlessly that we mistook it for our own invention. The deepest care is often the kind we never notice receiving. Consider how the search continues quietly, even now. Somewhere tonight, a researcher is pressing a leaf, recording a compound, learning what an elder already knew. The work is patient, unhurried, the way the forest itself is patient. There is no race in the plant's chemistry. It was made over ages and will keep its secrets a little longer if we let it. The discovery is not finished. It is ongoing, gentle, and it will outlast all of us, the way the green world always has. You may feel, drifting now, that the forest is less a place than a presence. It has watched over our species since before we had words for what it gave us. Every fever it cooled, every wound it closed, it did without ceremony. Scientists map its molecules, healers learned its rhythms, but beneath all of it is something simpler, a world that grew the cures we needed before we knew to ask. The forest does not announce its care, it simply, endlessly, provides. There is a softness in realizing how little we had to do. The foxglove made the molecule that steadies a failing heart. The healer found it, the chemist measured and named it. But the gift itself was already complete, already nodding in a hedgerow, long before any of us arrived. We did not create our medicines so much as receive them. And receiving asks nothing of you but openness, the willingness to accept that the world has been kind in ways you never had to earn. You can let yourself rest in this. The living world has been tending you your whole life. The air you breathe, the food that mends you, the molecules that ease your pain, all of it grew from the same quiet generosity. Nature did not wait for our gratitude. It simply kept making, kept offering, kept holding us the way it holds every living thing. There is nothing you must do to deserve it. The care was given freely, the way the forest gives shade. Think of how the periwinkle asks nothing in return. It did not need a child to be saved or a family to learn its name, to fold its alkaloids leaf by leaf, as it always has. It makes its chemistry, whether we notice or not, and offers it the same. This is care without condition, the rarest kind. And tonight, as you grow heavy and slow, you can let yourself simply receive it, the way the soil receives the rain. There is no debt here. You may sense, half dreaming now, that you were never separate from the green things at all. The same chemistry runs through the leaf and through you, written in the same patient code. When a plant heals you, it is almost like a cell recognizing a cell, an old kinship remembered in the body. We came from the same soil, the same long unfolding. The forest is not outside you. It is the larger life you have always belonged to, and it has never once let you go. There is a comfort in how quietly all of this is true. You do not have to understand the molecules to be held by them. You do not have to name the plants to be kept by them. The healing happened, and happens still, whether you are awake to it or asleep. As your breath slows and the room softens, that care continues in your blood, in your cells, in the long green memory of the world. You are being tended even now, especially now. You can feel the whole of it settling into one quiet truth. The medicines, the forests, the healers, the molecules, all of them are threads of a single story, the story of a world that has always cared for the life within it. You are one of those lives. You always have been. And tonight, there is nothing left to learn, nothing left to hold. The green world has been keeping you all along. and it will keep you through the dark, gently, the way it always has. Nature has been tending you since before you drew your first breath, and it will be tending you long after this night has passed. You were never alone in a cold and careless world. You were always held by the leaves, by the roots, by the patient living chemistry that grew you and heals you and asks for nothing back. The pharmacy was always the forest. The forest was always kind. And tonight, you can simply rest inside that kindness and let it carry you down into sleep. The green world has been making medicine for you since long before you had a name for it. Every plant you have ever passed was, in its own quiet way, chemistry that grew on your behalf, leaf and root and flower, all of it living, all of it offering. You were never on the outside of that. You were always the life it was tending. Let your entire being dissolve into the soft green dark beneath an old forest canopy, where every breath the leaves release is one your body already knows how to take. If the world's oldest pharmacy has been caring for you all along, then tonight, everything you are still holding can be set down. It is already held. The world has been kind to you in ways you never had to ask for. Not the dramatic kindness of rescue, but the slow, ordinary kindness of a forest that grew the cures before you knew you'd need them, that folded its chemistry into your body so gently you mistook the gift for your own. Tonight, in this quiet, you can feel how long that care has been running. Through every fever it cooled, every ache it eased, every molecule that found its place in you, the living world was tending you, asking nothing. There is nothing left for you to earn here. The generosity was never conditional. It grew toward you the way roots grow toward water, without being asked, without keeping count, without needing to be seen. You can let yourself be held by it now, the way you have been held all along. But the forest's oldest knowledge raises a quieter question. If the plants learned to heal us long before we understood them, what else has the living world been quietly teaching in languages we are only beginning to hear? The next video in the Sleep Whispers playlist begins there. You can allow these thoughts to settle now, like leaves drifting down through still air, finding the soft ground without effort, without sound. Let your body grow heavy with the quiet that comes after being cared for. If sleep comes, let it take you down into the green dark where the world has always tended its own. If your eyes have already closed, let them stay. There is nothing on that shelf of healers you still need to reach for tonight. Rest well, gentle soul. You were never alone in a careless world. You were always held by the living kindness that grew you and heals you still. Drift gently into the green quiet, where the living world becomes the softest place to rest. Good night.